Hey everybody, this is Keith Mabry from K&L Wine Merchants, and I am hosting a little discussion about our selection of Baja wines. So, kind of a category that's near and dear to my heart. I discovered this category, or it was really came to me a few years ago when I was like on one of those boat cruises to Ensenada, and like on the day trip you could go up to the wine country. So kind of at the time I was like, I don't know, but it was kind of exciting, and it was still an area that was kind of coming along and just emerging as something a little bit different. It's always fun to find these new categories that are interesting, that are kind of undiscovered, and it really came into prominence when the region itself, when what's his name? Oh, sorry, hold on one second. I'm still working this out. Oh, I didn't know I could do that. So, anyways, so I came into this, so it was, Rick Bayless actually did a really great piece in Baja and kind of introduced us to the category. So I went down there and kind of explored and started discovering some new wine producers, and was kind of entranced by what was going on down there. So we're gonna have a special guest checking in here in just a second, and here he is. So this is my dear friend Tom Bracamontes, and he is kind of helping me go through all of this, and so he should be joining us any second now. So Tom is an importer. He has been importing wines from Mexico since 2015, or he started his company in 2015, and he just started bringing wines in around 2016. So it looks like he's trying to log in now, so hopefully he'll be with us shortly. So anyways, my experience though was this is kind of an area that's emerging, and it's a little bit complicated because it's an old wine growing region, but it wasn't getting a lot of traction. The wines kind of suffered from some issues. There's a lot of salt in the soil there, so you could really kind of end up with these sort of brackish, almost salty styled wines. A little bit unusual flavor profile, but over just these past few years, the wines have exploded in quality and character and a lot of depth. So it looks like he's having trouble connecting, so hopefully he'll be with us shortly. But anyways, if there are questions, happy to answer, and then obviously I'll forward some of those to Tom when he was able to join us. I met Tom a few years ago. He came in the store, and that's kind of when my head really turned for the category. It was one of those situations where, let's see if I can keep. So I'm waiting for, he's having some issues joining. There he is. There's Tom.
Hey, Keith.
Hey, I can see you. Don't
You got me?
Yep, you're there.
Perfect.
All
I'm
right.
on.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyways, I was just talking about my own personal experience with the category, how I met you just a few years ago, and you kind of you turned my head. So I was kind of like a little skeptical. I liked the category. I thought it was interesting, but it wasn't until you kind of brought in a lineup of like, I think 10 different wines and even 2 or 3 producers in the store when I said, oh, wow, there's something else going on down here. And this is a lot more interesting. What was it about the wines from Baja that really caught your eye when you first discovered them?
You know what, Keith? It was just the fact that they were doing stuff different down there. There's no rules in Mexico. They grow about 120 different grape varieties, Spanish, Rhone, Italian, Burgundian, you name it. And with no rules, they just get to play around. And once you spend a little time, you realize there's a young wine community down there, young winemakers from all over the world, Spain, Argentina, Chile, and they come in with just this freedom and this freedom to explore. And for me, it was just a nice change of pace after being involved in the Napa wine industry for the better part of 10 years, to just go down there and try stuff that was completely different, unexpected. The blends were all over the place, and kind of enjoying and learning through hits and misses.
So what was kind of your wow moment? what was it where you said, "Oh, this is it"? Were you down there, or did somebody bring you a sample and you tasted it and you said, "I need to get down there ASAP"?
No, I mean, much like you, I had heard in through the grapevine, I heard about this region, Baja California, and I remember 10 years I had tried some wines, and they were awful, and I'm like, I don't get it. And they're like, no, it's really cool. So as it turned out, I got fired from the winery that I was working with in Napa. I had time on my hands. I figured, what the hell? I'll go down. The worst case is I'll eat a bunch of fish tacos and I'll come back for a weekend. And I went down there, started trying wines, wasn't impressed initially. And on the third day, I started running into wines that I thought were really, really well made. And after that, I'm like, okay, I need to go down every month just to research. And I just kept going down there. I kept trying to figure out who were the cool producers. And once I found out about Lulu Martinez, that kind of changed everything, because that girl just was raising the bar. And
Yeah.
for me, that was kind of almost like that epiphany moment.
So yeah, that's where you saw sort of a difference in kind of what was the status quo, and maybe something that was a little bit more like that next level of ingenuity, the technology, kind of know-how.
Well, it was somebody who had spent almost 15 years in Bordeaux.
Yeah.
And then she was coming back picking, her Sauvignon Blanc a month before everybody else. And everybody was making fun of her. And then you try the finished product, and it was incredible. Great acidity, and not flabby like a lot of the older wines used to be.
Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about her in a bit too, because we've got some wines that we do stock in the store that are some of my favorites, and definitely some fan favorites here in the, for our salespeople and the customers when they've been shopping in the store too. So, like, what's a little bit of the background of Baja California? Can you give us kind of just a quick overview of the history of the region itself?
Sure. I mean, what most people don't realize, I mean, it kind of feels like Baja's this new wine growing region. And in reality, they've been making wine down there nonstop since the late 1800s.
Yeah.
The problem is that whether it was because of the Catholic Church or whether it's the Spanish influence, it never really got to be a serious winemaking industry. In the 70s, you saw a couple of bigger the wineries kind of pop their heads up. But really, this is all kind of taking place in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
It's old, but yet it's new. And everybody recognizes the history, but they also relish the fact that they're not beholden by rules from Europe. They just go out there and do whatever they want. And to me, that kind of spirit of exploration, I think right now is really a big reason, and Mexican gastronomy. But it's long history. I mean, the oldest winery in North America is Casa Madero out of Coahuila, Mexico in the 1500s.
Yeah, and that winery has been operating ever since. Yeah.
Since the 1500s.
Yeah, I think there was a prohibition in Mexico at one point, but I think they were still making wine for like the church or wherever, something like
exactly.
that. Yeah.
And even guys in Baja, they did that for a long time, because remember, all the missions started down in Baja and worked all their way up to basically Napa.
Yeah.
So you had that mission kind of set up, and that was almost kind of like the first distribution model for Sacramento wine.
Yeah. The church always finds a way around some of those rules. Right?
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, what's the oldest winery that's still operating in Baja?
That's Bodega Santo Tomas.
Yeah.
They've been around for, I think this year they're celebrating their 130th year.
So that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, and what's also interesting is they're going through kind of a renaissance where they're kind of like recreating themselves. They realize that they've been here for 130 years, but they could need a bit of a refresher. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to the modern demands of winemaking in the next few years.
Mm-hmm. So one of the producers that you introduced me to a couple of years ago is Camilo Magoni.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of one of those emblematic of the region where you have a producer who's actually Italian, who expatriated to Mexico somewhere along the way.
Yep.
He works with kind of classic European grape varieties, but also kind of blends in a lot of his home Italian grape varieties. What can you say about him?
Well, I mean, Camilo Magoni he's like the grandfather of the patriarch of the valley. He's been there for 55 vintages, so he's seen the entire region grow up in front of him. Originally from a little town in Piemonte, and he got his degree at a famous wine academy in Alba. So he came to work for L.A. Cheto. L.A. Cheto is the largest winery in Baja. They produce half of the total production, so they do 1 million cases by themselves. He probably worked 40 vintages for Cheto, and at probably the ripe old age of his late 60s, launched Casa Magoni. And Camilo's approach to winemaking is wine is part of the daily meal. So he makes wines that are very affordable, very easy to drink, because he wants you to drink them at every meal.
Right.
So he's not looking to create something that's going to gather dust in the cellar.
Yeah. So the Magoni that we have is the Manaz.
Yes.
Which is the do you remember what the blend is?
80% Viognier, 20% Fianno.
So Fianno, very, very kind of classic Italian grape. But and most people who don't drink Italian wines wouldn't even know what Fianno is.
Well, and that's the cool thing. Here you've got two grape varietals that I don't think grow anywhere else in the world together, but Valle de Guadalupe.
Think of a
you have a white Rhone varietal blended with an Italian varietal.
Yeah.
He also does a Chardonnay Vermentino, a Burgundian varietal with a white Italian. That little bottle embodies the spirit of Mexico. He thought the Viognier was beautiful, had great aromatics, but it lacked a little acid, and the Fianno kind of gives it that little acid lift.
So one of the questions that we had pop up was, so are there signature grape varieties in the region?
That is a really good question. We're probably a good 20 years away from identifying signature varietals.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's about 120 different varietals being grown. Camilo by himself on his properties grows 112 different grape varietals. So that he's trying to get a sense of what is the big winner out there. I think Rhone varietals do really well. Tempranillo does really well. I personally am not convinced that most 100% Cabernets do that well in the heat down there. They're better for blending.
Mm-hmm.
But that's really part of the experimentation. We're probably Chenin Blanc does really well south of Ensenada. But I think we're probably a good 10, 15 years away from saying, is there a signature grape varietal?
Right.
In the meantime, just enjoy the fact that you can make these crazy wines and they taste delicious.
So one of the other producers, and kind of talking about like these really interesting mixes, is the Jardin Secreto.
Yes.
From Adobe Guadalupe, right? And so these guys do a lot of really interesting blends. They definitely have the influence of sort of the church, because most of their tête de cuvée wines all have like archangel names.
Yes.
But this I thought was just a really, really fun wine, the Jardin Secreto, which is Tempranillo, Cabernet, and Sancerre. So you've got Bordeaux mixed with Rhone mixed with Spanish. I mean, that's it doesn't get any more international than that.
Where else in the world are you going to find those three grape varietals blended together? Nowhere but Baja. And I think that's the fun thing. I mean, Adobe is kind of one of the cult wineries of Mexico. They were one of what they refer to as the original six. They really started doing wines on a premium level. Mm-hmm. So you'll find their reds in all of the fine dining restaurants throughout Mexico City and Guadalajara, all the resorts, Cabo San Lucas. But they really, really do kill it when it comes to reds. They'll do, reds that might be Bordeaux inspired, reds that are maybe Australian inspired. Then they have a blend that's the Carubiel is more Northern Rhone inspired. And then you've got the Raphael, which is a blend of Cabernet and Nebbiolo, which sounds crazy and probably should never be tried anywhere else in the world. and that's their flagship red. So go figure.
Yeah. So I will say that is maybe one of the most striking wineries I visited there. They have one of the most incredible, just beautiful cellars to visit.
Yep.
It's just a piece of like Baroque art. It's really, really spectacular to look at. And they have beautiful little gardens and everything like that. And it's like a bed and breakfast there too, if I remember right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bed and breakfast. They have they have horses out there. I mean, it's basically where True Miller lives. And it kind of, the winery turned into a place after they had the hacienda.
And so True Miller is the owner of the of the property?
Yes. As Camilo is kind of like the patriarch of the valley, True Miller is the matriarch of the valley.
Okay. And so, where is she from?
True was originally born, if I got the story correctly, she was born in Indonesia. She worked for Pan Am back in the day. She's also a brilliant linguist. She speaks 10 different languages. And her husband, her husband who's passed away a while ago, Don Miller, was in the banking business in Southern California, built a number of banks, sold them, and they wanted to get involved in wine. They looked around Napa, went down to Baja, fell in love with it, and they're like, nope, we're planting here.
Right.
And now they've been there for, I think, 22 vintages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So long storied history there, and definitely brought to years ago, even before I had visited, I think I had tasted wines from them. They were already being brought into the U.S., but
Yes,
I would say qualitatively too, they have started to really hit their peak, as far as like where they consistency and the character seems to shine through vintage to vintage.
Keith, what I would say is if anybody has tasted wines from Baja even 5 years ago and hasn't been back, now's the time to go. It's like everybody is stepping their game up. It's the Mexican gastronomy scene in Valle de Guadalupe is exploding, and there's this kind of friendly competition that the chefs want to support Mexican wines, but really until 5 years ago, they didn't carry Mexican wines. Most restaurants in Mexico carried wines from Spain, from France, from Italy, Argentina. They didn't carry Mexican wines. But now the cultural pride is kicking in, so everybody's kind of pushing themselves. Mm-hmm. So right now, if you go into a restaurant in Baja, there's wine on probably 90% of the tables being drank with food.
Yeah. Well, so you mentioned the gastronomic scene down there, and I remember like our last trip last year when we went down was to Solar Fortune, which is one of my favorite places to just sit out, and they have a great patio dining experience. Yep. So we did bring in the O Positivo, and this is actually all of their vines are in the Valle de Guadalupe, aren't they?
Correct. They from the vineyard that you have to drive past to get to the tasting room / restaurant, it's all estate. So all of their fruit comes from that estate vineyard.
Yeah, and so maybe explain a little bit, because we always think of the Valle de Guadalupe, which is definitely a destination. It's like going to Napa. There's tons of great food, lots of wineries to visit, but there's actually many of the growing areas. There's a multitude of different valleys that sort of run either concurrently or nearby that are actually where some of the better fruit is actually coming from.
Of course. Everybody knows Valle de Guadalupe because that's where all the restaurants and hotels are. But south of Ensenada, there's at least four other prominent valleys. You have Ojos Negros, which is a little higher elevation, which a lot of people are starting to plant up there. So we'll start seeing fruit and wines being made specifically from Ojos Negros in the next probably 3 to 5 years. Then you have Valle de la Grulla, and probably the best known winery in Valle de la Grulla is Palafox. And then further south, you have San Vicente and Santo Tomas. And when you start getting the fruit south of Ensenada, it's a little cooler microclimate. The water is fresher. Some of the soil is a little bit more clayish, which retains the water, maintains great acid. So there's a lot of guys that might be in Valle de Guadalupe, but they're buying a lot of their fruit from south of Ensenada because the fruit is incredible quality.
So, like with Solar Fortune, they own their own vineyards. Do they buy fruit from other producers as well?
No. Although there are some wineries that will buy fruit to kind of augment their production, Solar Fortune is 100% estate grown, and it really is a great project. I mean, it's kind of like they're hidden in this little valley aside from Valle de Guadalupe, and this valley funnels in this cool air and this breeze that you get from 9 in the morning to about 6 o'clock at night every single day. So it helps maintain nice freshness and nice acids. I think that's why that O Positivo was amongst one of the first Mexican wines that I got into the French Laundry.
Oh, yeah. So, and the O Positivo is 50% Syrah, 50% Cabernet.
Correct.
Yeah.
But it's more Northern Rhone in style than an Australian or Paso Robles Cab Syrah.
Right. Beautiful. So you mentioned the Ojos Negros and the Palafox, and we have the one of their wines. That's
the Pionero.
Pionero, yeah. And so this is this one's Tempranillo, Merlot, and Cabernet.
Yes.
So again, that's sort of the rule. There are no hard rules here.
No. The only rule, and one of the important things to know there is that Palafox in Valle de la Grulla, once again, they get all of their fruit from their own estate vineyard. But Palafox, when they wanted to raise the bar in the wine program, they brought on Lulu Martinez as a consultant. So
we mentioned her earlier. Let's talk a little bit more about Lulu, because she has one of the most fascinating stories, I think, of any wine producer I've ever met.
So Lulu grew up in Ensenada, went to France. She was studying other things in France, fell in love with wine, somehow worked her way over to Chateaubriand Contenac, got a job working at the bottom, and then became a major part of their winemaking team and was there for 15 years. When Henri Lerton, because the Lerton family's got 35 different properties between a family all over the world. Yeah. So when Henri decided, hey, we need to start another project somewhere, Lulu mentioned we should go back to Baja. There's a lot going on there. Henri came out with Lulu for 3 days, and in 3 days he said, we have to invest. So when Lerton came in, it kind of signaled to other people around the world, hey, you got a serious player in town that's investing money in the future of Baja. Lulu came back because she knows everybody from her childhood. Her uncle has a big vineyard that they buy fruit from. All the people that literally came to work for Lulu initially were friends and family members that she knew. So it was just this great confluence of events. And Lulu brought back with her a more international perspective. You also had Daniel Lundberg from Adobe Guadalupe, originally from Chile, that brought in his perspective. You know, you had Sergio Eras coming from Argentina and Cristina Pino coming from Spain. So you had and then Santiago Lopez got his degree from UC Davis. So this young generation brought in this new way of thinking, and it all kind of hit at this time when gastronomy was blowing up as well. But Lulu's had a tremendous impact on the region. She also speaks 3 languages fluently, so she's great for marketing. And I think Palafox, they were very, very wise in bringing her on to help them make affordable wines, but well-made wines.
Yeah. So speaking of the Henri Lerton wines, or Henri Lerton, this is the Sauvignon Blanc from him, and this was the wine that sort of launched that. So how long has Lerton been around then? When did they start?
I think Lerton, they launched about 6 years ago, more or less, in Baja. So, I mean, they launched about 6 years ago. I was lucky that I started my import business just at a time when they were getting started. And Lulu was looking around, talking to other importers. And a dear friend of ours who unfortunately passed away, Ray Magnuson with Lechuza, told Lulu, before you make a decision, talk to La Competencia. And Lulu and I immediately hit it off. And I think for me, that's also been a harbinger of my growth, because people saw that an international player wanted to deal with a small importer like me, and other people started taking me more serious as well.
That's great. It's a great bridge. So, you know, one of the controversial grape varieties that's grown in Baja is Nebbiolo, which I think they've sort of determined that it's not the traditional Piemontese Nebbiolo, but just the mere fact that it bears the name Nebbiolo definitely rankles many of our Italophiles, especially our wine buyer. He's like, well, that's an interesting wine, but I wouldn't call it Nebbiolo.
Yes.
But that's what makes this so interesting, is it's kind of its own thing.
Right.
And it has its own set of fingerprints. And I think the Lurton is probably one of the most indicative versions of that grape variety that's produced in that region.
I would agree as well. And if you do a little research down in Baja, you'll actually come across 2 versions of Nebbiolo. One that is from true cuttings that were brought over from Barolo, which Camilo is partly responsible for. And then there's this other clone of Nebbiolo that somehow got named Nebbiolo, that my guess is something different because it's too dark and too robust to be Nebbiolo. But right now, people are having fun with Mexican Nebbiolo, so be it. In 5 years, somebody's going to do a research, and we'll figure it out what it really is. Right. Kind of like kind of like Zinfandel and Primitivo or whatever. We'll figure it out eventually, but right now we're having fun.
Yeah, let it have its chance to shine in its own light for a while.
Exactly.
Be its own thing. I find that one of the most interesting blends I had visiting down there was a Tempranillo Nebbiolo blend.
Yes.
I thought it was because you get that acid and structure of the Nebbiolo, and the Tempranillo, which is a great warm weather grape variety, has like this nice richness and weight to it. The harmonious conversion of those two grape varieties seem to work really well. And yet, in any other circumstance, you would laugh it off the table, thinking like, that's not possible.
You know, Keith, that's a perfect example of what I tell everybody. If you're going down there, forget everything you've known about wine. Forget about what you tasted in Napa or Sonoma or Paso Robles. Just go down there with the pure love and enjoyment of trying. And you know what? Not every blend works. Sometimes it's like, okay, that's pretty awkward. But that's also part of the maturation process of that region. We can laugh together and go, yeah, I tried that. I think we're not going to do that again next year. It didn't really work that well.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's not like every single one of them has an established program where
exactly.
we produce this wine this way every year to meet the demand. It's like, we didn't like it this year. Let's do something entirely different.
I mean, I have wineries right now that have been with me for close to 5 years that we're going through that phase of weeding out certain wines that, they were okay, but they weren't great. And, we'll do some single varietals. We'll change around some things. But that, once again, you're watching a teenager grow into an adult.
Right.
And to me, I've been in Napa for the better part of 15 years. Napa does what it does. But being down in Baja, I get this rush of every time I go down there, there's something new to explore. And sometimes it's great, and sometimes it's not so great. But that's kind of fun, though.
And where am I talking to you from, by the way? Are you in Baja right now?
No, I'm actually back in Napa. I haven't gotten. Hopefully, we'll head back maybe early December.
Okay. So the ingenuity thing and sort of even following outside trends. One of my favorite discoveries from a year or so ago was the Lurton that Lulu was making an orange wine, the Naranja, which is I think one of the most interesting orange wines I've tasted. Not just from this region, but in the last couple of years. I thought it felt, it wasn't as tannic or heavy-handed as some of the Slovenian or Italian wines or some of the Georgian wines, but it has a bit more texture and balance to it, maybe a little bit more fruit underneath that. What was sort of the genus for that? Do you know?
I think that, once again, that no fear exploration of let's try this. There are a couple of guys that are really, really aggressive on the natural wine scene in Mexico. Vino Cava does quite a few. They're probably the most in terms of overall production. Lulu decided to do the orange wine for Lurton. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not a big natural wine fan myself. But when I tried it with the scallops that they make over at Fianno, I was dumbfounded. I mean, it was just an incredible pairing.
Oh, good transition point.
There you go.
It's one of my favorite wineries, and probably my favorite dining experience last year was at Fianno, which is the restaurant at the winery Bruma. And of course, Lulu makes the wines at Bruma now. So it's like one big happy family of wines.
Well, Lulu is not just a winemaker there. She was also named a partner.
Oh, fantastic.
So, and as is the chef, David, who sang at Fianno, he's also a partner at Bruma as well.
Yeah.
So the great thing, I mean, Bruma is an example of the difference between Napa and Baja. In Napa, there's all sorts of regulations where you can't have restaurants tied to wineries or whatever. In Baja, if you have enough water flow and it's on your property, you can build whatever the heck you want. So if you want to build some beautiful rustic casitas for guests to stay in, go ahead. If you want to build a restaurant, go ahead. It all comes down to, do you have enough water to be able to run those businesses? So if you go to Fianno or to Bruma, you can be there literally all day. They just opened another restaurant, an outdoor restaurant called Wine Garden, which is the hottest restaurant in Baja now.
Oh wow!
So they have it's casual. It's under the olive trees. It literally sprang forth out of nowhere, out of necessity, because they needed outdoor space because of COVID.
Oh wow!
So, and now it's like you could eat lunch all day there, then walk over to take a tour of the winery, and then finish with dinner at Fianno.
It does not sound like a bad day at all.
No, and if you have a casita or a villa there, then you crash there as well.
You throw a little nap in, and then you just crawl back to bed after. Yeah.
You know what? A little siesta middle part of the day is not a bad thing in Mexico.
Oh yeah. What do you kind of see as the future of the wine market in the Valle de Guadalupe and the surrounding area? Like, what are you looking at in the next 5 to 10 years?
You know, Keith, I think right now what everybody's kind of concerned with is that, responsible growth. I mean, it's in Mexico, the one challenge that they have is when something gets good, everything kind of floods into the region. And then, 10 years down the road, you're something you don't want to be. Good or bad, the lack of water down there will probably keep everything at bay for a while. And hopefully they can develop a responsible plan that allows them to grow without becoming Disneyland for adults.
Right.
You've been down there. Half the roads that you drive on are dirt roads. Half the time you feel like you're lost. If you're taking your cute little low-rise Mercedes down there, you're going to mess up your undercarriage pretty easily.
No, definitely bring the SUV. Yeah.
Yeah, you want to
take drive would not be a bad idea. In some places. Most places it's pretty accessible though.
Yeah. So for me, I just hope it's responsible growth. It's great that now outside of Southern California, the number of states that are asking for Mexican wines. I just closed distribution deals for South Carolina and Colorado within the last 3 days. I've got Indiana, Wisconsin, Washington State, and Connecticut all set to go first quarter of next year. So we've gone past this little, Mexican market, historical Mexican states. People are looking for new, interesting wines that are, Mexican wines aren't inexpensive, but they're not crazy expensive. So I think they're in a good sweet spot. But I think we're at an inflection point with that this is really going to explode over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, so essentially you did mention the price points, and so I just kind of to recap some of the wines we talked about. Mm-hmm. So Casa Magoni always kind of likes to price themselves more at the entry level of the market. So this the white, the Manaz white is $17.99 in our store. So, and that's just a really fun, slightly aromatic, a little bit textured white. We also have the Solar Fortún. This is $34.99. That's the Positivo. We have the Jardin Secreto. That was also $34.99 as well. And then the kind of Palafox, I think, offers really, really good value.
Yep, they do.
Tends to be more of a good intro to the category, and also just a bit more, say, kind of cleaner winemaking, just brighter styles. So really good, easy entry point. And the Palafox Pionero is $21.99. And then we had the Bruma, the Plan B, which is not at the top of their line. They've got some even more serious cuvées, I think, underneath.
They do. The Ocho line. The Ocho line is a reserve line.
Yeah, but the Plan B is $29.99, and I think was one of my favorite bottles that I drank the last time I was down there, especially. And then the Lerton wine, which I think is getting probably some of the most critical attention, and maybe because of the influence of Henri Lurton and his connection with a lot of the critics. I've seen this written up in the Wine Spectator and a few other wine trade magazines as well. And so the Sauvignon Blanc is $24.99. The orange wine is $34.99. And the Nebbiolo is also $34.99, which I think is surprisingly a very, very reasonable entry-level price point for Nebbiolo in that region, because it does tend to be almost everyone's most expensive grape variety.
Yeah, I think the only place where Baja has kind of a hole in the portfolio, if you will, is that $10, $12, $13 bottle price. It's because of the lack of production, because of the economics of where you're buying your fruit in dollars. All your supplies are in dollars, or the peso against the dollar. So it's really tough for them to get that $10, $12, $13 bottle retail. But, if you can find Camilo 17-ish, that's about where you're going to start.
Yeah. And not unreasonable when you factor all of the other elements that go into the production of
Exactly.
it. These are not high production, mass produced
No.
wines. These
Really,
are,
really small production.
yeah. I mean, we're talking about, a wine region that's, kind of on the cusp of where Paso Robles was 20 years ago, of like, being not at the lowest price point, but at a price point that says, we're making quality wines and
Exactly.
we're growing as a region. And of course, there are lots of very premium wines in the region too. But I imagine most of those probably go to some of the top restaurants in Mexico and maybe even a few outside the country.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, Keith, is that we have the ability to obviously hit that higher end price point as well, and whether it's to retail or to high end restaurants. I mean, for us, I don't play favorites in that regard. If K&L felt that some higher end stuff is appropriate, we certainly have enough to be able to get to consumers.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I really want to thank you for your time. I think it was great to talk to you, catch up. I haven't seen you in months. We've talked a couple of times, but it's good to see your face.
Well, I tell you, once we get past this whole COVID, we've got to get back down to Baja. There's so many new restaurants, and I know how you love to eat and drink. So we got a bunch of new places we got to stop at.
I believe me, I cannot wait. I look so forward to seeing that.
Hey, let's put together a K&L trip and invite a bunch of customers. Let's bring them all down there.
I'd be up for that. Oh yeah,
all right.
You got a lot of thumbs up on that one.
Perfect. Well, I'm down with that.
All right, Tom. Well, thanks so much.
Thanks, Keith. Have a great evening, and thanks for all the support.
Thanks.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you all for tuning in today. And always feel free to reach out if you have any questions. You can email me at keithmabry@klwines.com. That's KEITHMABRY@klwines.com. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Keith.